What is up, everyone? Welcome to the W Sports Podcast. Jimmy T and Tubby, and we are back because today we're going into Draft Prep 3.0, and it's still Tubby's favorite time of year. We got opening weekend literally is less than a week away. Draft Prep meaning that we're about a month away. It's an incredible time. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, share the podcast with someone who doesn't have a good sports podcast that they can listen to. But we're going to get into it today with linebackers. And we're going to get into it with wide receivers. We're going to get Tubby's thoughts. So, Tubby, welcome back to the show.
What's up? Yeah, these are two, I think, intriguing position groups.
Yes.
The linebackers may not have a whole lot of depth, but I think there's a lot of good, potential. I shouldn't say potential, but a lot of guys that can be very productive, either backups or special teams. And then I think a lot of people are down on the wide receivers this year, which I think is kind of crazy. I mean, yeah, there's not the top guy like there has been over the last couple of years, but I think there's a lot of good wide receivers in this draft.
Yeah, and we're going to get into it. We're going to start with linebackers. And just a little caveat, the linebacker also sometimes includes edge rushers for some people. Sometimes people put edge rushers with the defensive line, and that is what we will do on the W Sports Podcast, put those edge rushers, because let's be honest, they're not dropping in coverage 90% of the time. So we're going to go ahead and give them their due on the defensive front, and we're going to focus this spot today on the linebackers specifically. So it should be fun. Now, one of the things we have done is some of the highlights. We're not going through every single person on that is a possible pick, but what we will do is highlight some of the key risers, fallers, the depth pieces. But also, we're doing something this year called "What Star Class Is This?" Or from a 1-star, like, listen, you might get 1 or 2 role players at best, but it's not a good draft class. All the way up to a 5-star, where you could have generational talent. Maybe you even have just the next wave of the Brian Urlachers and Patrick Willis's of back in the day we grew up watching. So it should be fun. We got one of our own. We got to talk about Billy Bowman in the last episode. So if you missed that one, go back and watch our defensive backs one. But we do have Danny Sussman. I can't wait to hear your thoughts on him. But we're not going to start with that. Tubby, I want to start with, who do you think is the number one? Is it a consensus Jalen Walker, or is it who else would you have that might be battling out for the number 1 spot?
Yeah, for me, I have Jalen Walker more as that hybrid edge outside linebacker. I don't have him as an interior guy, like interior linebacker. I think he's more suitable for the edge, that kind of tweener. He reminds me, I'm not saying the play, but he kind of gives you that Micah Parsons where, you can play him the inside if you need to, but he's more suitable for the edge and the outside stuff. But for me, my number 1 interior linebacker is Jahad Campbell from Alabama. I mean, the dude's just a freak. He's big, fast, strong. I mean, he went to Alabama as an edge rusher, transitioned to the middle linebacker, which is kind of crazy to think of.
It's a tough transition.
Yeah, I mean, he's a ball stopper. He can blitz. He's gotten a lot better in coverage. I think for me, he's the number 1. It's not the like you said, it's not the deepest, but I think there's a lot of guys that can be contributing players in the NFL in this group.
Yeah, do you feel like it's a pretty big drop off after him, or it's a kind of a jumble with 2 or 3, like a tier?
Yeah, I see. I think he's far and away above 2 and 3, but I think 2 and 3 are still good and can be really good NFL players.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
Danny. I got Danny Stutzman number 2. I think the fact that a lot of these drafts have him, 5, 6, 7 range in the linebacker, to me is crazy, because watching him play, we know he loves the game of football. We know he loves to go hit people. The one weakness for him is sometimes he gets lost in the shuffle when he's trying to get the right angle on the outside runs. But he showed at the combine that he's athletic enough, ran a 4.52, which is really good for an interior linebacker. He has the ball skills. He played tight end in high school, had some interceptions, but he's not afraid to put his nose in there. And he makes a lot of plays in the backfield and blows up a lot of plays. Maybe he doesn't make the tackle, but he's that guy that blows up the play to where the running backs now having to either try to cut it to the outside when it's supposed to be an inside run, or, it's outside run. Now he's got, cut it this way. So I think that he is someone that for some reason people are overlooking. And then next I have Carson Schweisinger from UCLA. I think those 3 are clearly the top 3. And then after that, for me, it kind of starts to drop off where I'll see guys more as, role players and special teams, but there's still some good value there late in the draft for the linebackers if you're looking for some backup guys and, depth pieces.
Yeah, as you look at this, I mean, those top three that you're putting out there, I would imagine those are all day one and two, or do you feel
Hmm.
like some of the okay? Is there anybody that is a day three that you say depth piece that you could see them sneak into that maybe end of round three, based off of the need that's even out there for linebackers?
Yeah, I think Nick Martin from Oklahoma State.
Yeah,
He,
another guy that's further down on the rankings,
yeah,
I think, and
and
you're one of the higher ones. There you go.
yeah, I think. I mean, I like Barrett Carter. I wasn't super impressed with his season this year, or what he did at the combine and stuff. Samel Moden, I think he's kind of a tweener between middle
Yeah,
linebacker, maybe edge rusher. Chris Paul, he really did bad. He really hurt himself. I'm surprised he's still as high as he is on a lot of people's draft boards. He did not do good at the Senior Bowl. He did not do good at the combine. He ran real slow, and I don't know if he has that explosiveness, but Nick Martin, he's kind of in that same mold as Danny Stutzman, where he's going to make plays. He's not afraid to put his nose in there, blow up the plays, and he's a really good tackler. I think someone that's kind of getting a little overlooked when it comes to the interior linebackers.
yeah, I think that's a good element. This is a position that they're trying to almost get rid of in the NFL. It's almost like
Yeah.
what they did with running backs over the last, I don't know, seven,
Hmm.
10 years, where I think eventually as teams go back to running the ball more, you're going to see the linebackers become a more prevalent position because you
Yep.
can't have all these undersized guys, assuming that we can make
Hmm.
the full transition back to having really solid offensive line play and you can have to give better position. I think you're going to get a better balanced game as a fan
Hmm.
and more enjoyable thing to watch, but you're going to be able to see these linebackers. We're kind of on that cusp of do we eliminate it almost or do we get these guys back into the game where they should be?
Yeah.
Um, so you've already mentioned some of the people that are sliding down in this draft board. Any of those that if your team gets it based off of just I see the raw potential, it needs some time maybe that you think a team should be taking a chance on later in this draft, late on day three.
It's going to be Barrett Carter. I think that he has a lot of the potential there. He's fast, he's athletic, he can make plays, but there's, like I said, you go back and watch the film, there's a lot of inconsistencies in his game. So if he can get somewheres where he can sit a year or two and be just like that backup guy, come in for a few plays here and there, and kind of learn, a little bit better on angles that he needs to take for his tackles and stuff like that. I think he could turn into a good NFL, potential, number two
Mhm.
starting interior linebacker, depending on what system you play.
Well, I think that's an interesting pick. I mean, for him to come up twice now in this, you're like, it's higher ceiling, not an
Hmm.
electric ceiling, but it's a higher ceiling.
Yeah.
But the floor is a little bit low based off what we've seen even over the last year. But he's come from Clemson. It is a
Yeah.
school that has produced quite a bit of defensive talent. But many
Hmm.
people have him ranked above guys
Yeah.
like Chris Paul or like Danny Stutzman.
Yeah. Then that's one thing that you'll see when you look at rankings is, I mean, they are very subjective.
Oh, for sure.
And
Yeah.
so, like you said, I'm looking more on. I think a lot of times I want to see guys that I know, okay, no matter what, they're going to be a good player.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people will do a lot of their projections based off of potential, which, that helps, but it also could lead to guys, dropping further down the board that end up being way better because, oh, maybe they were a little bit slower or maybe they, a little bit older, but I'll take those guys over someone with a lot of potential if the ceiling and the floor are that far apart.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Any final thoughts besides ranking this as a star class, 1 to 5 stars that you have for the linebackers?
I'll put it at a 2.5. Like you said, I think there's three guys that are going to be good NFL players. I think there's one or two that could be real, could be good NFL players too. But I think a lot of this is going to be a lot of depth players. I don't expect a whole lot of these guys to go early in the draft.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that one. Well, that means we are moving on to the most diva position in all of football, I think, right now, and that is
Yeah.
huge. It's the wide receivers. Now, we talk about how good this class was even in the previous
Hmm.
This had last year. You had guys like Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbor, here's Roma Dunze, Brian Thomas, Lad McConkey, Adonai Mitchell. I mean, that was a pretty deep list. And then as you go through
Yeah.
their depth pieces, I would like to say Xavier Worthy ended up being a pretty solid piece. I think
Hmm.
later on, but looking at this year, is this a drop off year over year of talent, or do you think maybe it's more depth, less top end? What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely less top end. It's more depth, but I still think that there's some guys in this class that are going to be really good NFL players. Like I said, I know a lot of people are down on this wide receiver group, but I think part of it is that you look at guys like Luther Burden, production
Hmm.
drop. Well, a big part of that was due to Brady Cook being hurt most of the season.
Yeah,
Emeka Egbuka, his production's dropped over the last couple of years, but yet you got to look. He had Marvin Harrison Jr.
yeah,
had an injury. Played 2023 last year. He had Jeremiah Smith. I mean,
yeah.
it's hard to get. I mean, he still was a super productive wide receiver in college, and then you got guys like Alec Aomeyer from Stanford, who,
Hmm.
I mean, I think he has a lot of potential, but he played at Stanford. They don't throw the
Hmm.
football, and the quarterback play at Stanford has been god awful the last couple of
Since
years.
Andrew Luck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think this group there's more depth in it than people want to give credit to.
Hmm.
I think that there's going to be a lot of good NFL wide receivers in here. Maybe there's not a lot of surefire number ones like we saw over the last few years, but I think there's a lot of really good talent in this group.
Yeah. Who do you think should be the number one?
I mean, to me, it's Tedero McMillan. I've talked about him quite a bit over the last year or so. I think the dude, the catch radius, he ran,
Monster.
yeah, he's 6'4", 220, ran was at a 4.49 or something like that.
Hmm.
The ball skills are incredible. And even with the down season that Arizona had, he still had over 1,300 yards, multiple touchdowns. This guy, I think, can be, I don't want to put the label on, but he reminds me a lot of Mike Evans.
I think that's the biggest comp. Yeah, that people tend to give
Mm-hmm.
him. Yeah. Do you think, like, going into this year, what he could do? Like, in my mind, stat wise, production wise, I
Mm-hmm.
see him as almost a depending on where he ends up, as a Brian
Yeah.
Thomas type season
Mm-hmm.
in his rookie year,
Yeah.
which is solid.
Uh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, because Brian Thomas had an incredible season this year. And yeah, I could see that, especially if he lands somewhere with, really needs a wide receiver, and he's a great down the field, target. If you have that under the, that slot receivers, those possession receivers, you've got a guy that can go up and make plays all over
Mhm.
the field.
Yeah. Okay. So if that's your number one, I do see a almost like a tier, like a clump of
Mm-hmm.
wide receivers who could be that. So how do you separate maybe 2 through 5?
2 through 5, I think 2 through 5 is real close. Honestly, a
Hmm.
lot of these, like I said, it's going to be subjective, and who you
Scheme.
think. Yeah, scheme wise too. I know a lot of these wide receivers are falling down the draft boards right now, and like I mean, Tedero McMillan, he's even falling down the draft boards. Luther Burden, Emeka Ibuka. I think those guys are falling down the draft board, and I think a lot of it is due to I guess, like the perception that people have on the wide receiver group. But I still like Luther Burden. I think he's a great wide receiver, a really good slot receiver, kind of you know, can do a lot of what, like, see, trying to think of a player.
Yeah, as you think, I want to give a quick
Yeah.
thought on this. Part of
Mm-hmm.
the reason Luther Burden, his talent is so stinking. The floor is so high, and his
Yeah.
ceiling is high
Mm-hmm.
too.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you had a program like Mizzou, they just aren't able to utilize him as well as they could have. It was either drag routes or streaks, drag or
Mm-hmm.
streak, and it was a lot more drag routes than it was anything else.
Yeah.
It felt like just these shorter things, and he has the talent and the speed to break loose. But he has so much untapped potential. I think
Mm-hmm.
to make him a massive weapon here in this next level.
Yeah. So I would say he's kind of more along the lines of a Debo Samuel type player,
There you
where
go.
he's more where they like to give him the football. He's not going to line up in the backfield a whole lot like Debo did, but those jet sweeps, those uh, passes behind the line of scrimmage, because he's really good at the yards after catch. I think that's something that he's going to really excel at. He's really going to need to get better at, playing outside wide receiver, getting separation, on deep passes and stuff. But I really like him. I like Egbuka. I think to me, Egbuka is probably the best route runner in this draft. Which if you listen to any of my draft stuff over the last couple of years, route running is a massive thing for me. I want to see a guy that can run multiple routes on the route tree, crisp movement, and I see that with him. Matthew Golden is another one, kid from Texas that has really flown up the draft board. Ran a
Oh yeah.
4.29 at the combine. Really good, deep threat, 900-yard receiving, 10 touchdowns this year, and a deep wide receiver group for Texas. I think he's a guy. And then I think one that's really starting to sneak up the draft boards and people are starting to get really intrigued with is Jaden Higgins from Iowa State.
Hmm.
He's another big 6'4", but he ran fast at the combine.
Hmm.
He's got the catch radius. He had a monster season for Iowa State this year. I think that's another guy that I think has probably played himself into the second round.
Yeah, and I love all those takes. Jaden Higgins for sure. I mean, I just thankfully Oklahoma was in the SEC, if you could say that, because you didn't have to play against this guy that much. It just seems like he has just done a ton, just to be
Mm-hmm.
a red zone threat. All those things, like you said. I'm curious though. Is there I'm gonna say a non-power four school like that has a wide receiver that you're intrigued by? I think the wide receivers you see a lot
Yeah.
with these power schools, but the wide receivers has so many that come from out
Mm-hmm.
of nowhere. Who have you
Yeah.
seen?
Torrey Horton from Colorado State. This is a guy I have been really big on over the last couple of years. Watching him play against Colorado, not this last year, but the
Hmm.
year before, kind of put him on the radar. And I was like, okay, this kid is big, fast. He can play all parts of, inside, outside. I think this is a guy that someone's going to get probably in the fourth, fifth round, and they're going to look at it and go, yeah, that was one of the draft day steals because he has that potential. He's never had a really good quarterback. He's played in a system where, yeah, they like to spread the football, but like I said, quarterback play isn't the greatest.
Hmm.
And I think this is someone that can really break out in at the next level, and people are going to go, yeah, how did he fall that far?
Yeah. Is there one that you see that he's going to get drafted as a receiver, but he's going to find a better career as a return specialist, like that type of atmosphere? Like
Mm.
maybe he just doesn't profile at the next level that same way.
Yeah, Isaiah Bond. I'm not big on Isaiah Bond like everyone else.
Yeah.
I think he is a kick return specialist. He has a lot of problems staying healthy, and so I think yeah, he's got the speed, he's got the take the top off, but I just don't see him as a guy that can consistently put up the numbers that you want to see from a wide receiver. And I feel like someone's going to take a risk on him early in the draft, and I think he should go. And may come back to bite him in the butt.
Yeah. Well, how about this? Let's compare last year's. Give me the star rating for last year so we can kind of year over year see what you would say like star rating, the wide receiver class last year to this year's.
Yeah, last year's was a 5. I thought last year's was so deep, and I talked about that. I mean, there were so many guys last year where you have multiple people that could be potential number one wide receivers. This year, I would put it at a 4. I don't think it's super
Still
far
pretty
off.
good.
I just don't think that there's, you don't have the Marvin Harrison Jr. where you look at the projections and you go, yeah, he could be that number one. Neighbors, you
Hmm.
know, Adunze, guys like that where you're like, yeah, those are number one wide receivers. And so, like I said, depth wise, I love the depth at wide receiver in this draft. I think there's a couple other guys that we haven't even mentioned, like Xavier Restrepo. He reminds me a lot of what Ladd McConkey was. A
Hmm.
really good, crisp slot receiver. When it comes to route running, and Tej Johnson, he's getting knocked a lot for his size.
Hmm.
154 pounds, which yeah, that's tough. But for me, I love Tej Johnson. He reminds me a lot of a guy that was super high on the 2020 three draft, and that was Tank Dell. He plays a lot like Tank Dell, and I think Tank Dell got a lot of flack for his size. He was like 165, 164, something like that. So he's not too far off, but they play very similar games. They may not be the biggest guy, but they're going to be able to make a lot of plays. And yeah, Tank has gotten beat up, this last year, last couple of
Yeah, the
years.
size really didn't help, but his knee
Yeah,
completely shattered. So like
yeah,
that's
yeah,
not really size wise.
yeah. That wasn't really his fault.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, like I said, I think this is a really good draft, especially for depth when it comes to the wide receiver.
Yeah, no, I really like that take. I mean, that's great. And yeah, so we're going to continue on in this draft prep season. We're going to have at least, I'm going to say probably two more episodes. We'll do tight ends and probably maybe the edge rushers or defensive line, O line. I don't know. We're going to have to split it up because
Hmm.
there are some good tight ends, and
Yeah.
I think there are some guys who even right now could be wide receivers and profile more to the receiving tight end or
Hmm.
vice versa as you go into the tight end. So we're going to get more into that. I'm thinking NFL draft prep all the way up to 5.0. And then who knows? You know what we might actually do, Tubby? I'm just going to throw this out there as an idea if you're up for it. As we get closer, because who doesn't love more draft prep than NFL fans? We
Yeah.
we should be looking at these teams and saying like, hey, what are the top three needs and what should they be targeting based off of that kind of stuff? So we're going to get into some of those things as
Yeah.
we get closer, because sometimes it could be a loaded wide receiver class, and you're like, we don't need that. So you can
Yeah.
kind of see how some of those things are going to play out. But
Hmm.
it should be a fun time.
Yeah.
Tell me, any final thoughts today?
I just say don't sleep on the wide receiver group.
Hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of people that are. I'm going to say don't. I think you got, like I said, I think there's a lot of really good depth in this draft for the wide receivers.
Yeah, I really do like the idea of if your team especially needs offensive help and you're in
Hmm.
day three, throw a dart at one of these wide receivers. You
Yep.
might be more likely to hit than some of these other positions. So, especially with as
Absolutely.
deep as it is. So,
Hmm.
guys, that is the show today. We are so thankful, that is grateful for you guys watching with us. Make sure that you again subscribe if you haven't already. It's the easiest way to support the show. And we're going to continue with our draft prep. And don't worry, we also have MLB season breakdown coming up this week because you guessed it. That is right. It is officially opening week. I don't care what Dodgers or Cubs fans say. It's opening week this week. So, till then, see y'all next time.
See ya.
See you.